Chapter 2, The Return. The Return. ARandomAudiobookAppeared closed his eyes for a brief moment, enjoying the simple pleasures of the sun and the breeze and the gentle rhythm of the horse under him, its hoof beats a soft thudding on the packed dirt road, the forests about them still steaming from the last light shower. Baldur and Minsk were riding abreast just before him, Minsk talking gently to his sorrel mare, while Baldur scanned the horizon from the back of the stout grey gelding that had neither borne the threatened bow in its mane. Imoen apparently loathed to lose a perfectly nice ribbon just for the sake of her teasing, nor been affectionately named Guzzle. In fact, the elves had not named any of the beasts, they had not seemed to think it was necessary. ARandomAudiobookAppeared leaned forward to pat the neck of the chestnut mare that carried him, the beast giving a soft snort in reply. They had been on the road 6 days now, last night affording them the luxury of an inn as they stayed the night within trade meet, he and Minsk suffering the embarrassment of being recognized from their statue, much to Baldur's amusement, though perhaps he spoke too readily for both of them. Minsk had seemed rather to enjoy the attention in the end. Trade meet was a day behind them now, their pace good, and they would likely make Athkatla by the morrow. It was a relief to be away from Suldanesseller. The elven city, though beautiful, had never really rested well with him, something he had only truly realized once he had left, and the discomfort to which he had grown so accustomed was suddenly lifted from his heart. Out there and traveling again, ARandomAudiobookAppeared finally felt himself once more, and the idea he would soon be back in the city of his birth and at last able to commence the life he had so long worked towards made what had been left behind easier to endure. That said, the hours of riding left much time to think, his mind falling more often than not, on the others, Fritha especially. But in the same instance, it was easier being away rather than back there, every day spent wondering if there was not something he should be doing to help her, something that would somehow put right all that had been broken between them. But, whether there had been some solution or not, he had not come to it, and in the end, the order had called and now it was out of his hands. His steed's ears pricked suddenly, the discordant clash reaching ARandomAudiobookAppeared's hearing an instant later, the sounds of battle and unseen storm just over the horizon. Baldur glanced back to him with a frown, perhaps to suggest some cautious approach, but it was too late. Minsk's horse sprang forward with the Rashamese yell, a sharp jerk of his heels spurring it on, and there was little to do but follow. Up ahead, the scenes of a battle were cresting the horizon, a dozen or so robed men and their spooked mules ringed by their struggling guards who were hard pressed by the score of bandits who had surrounded them, while above the throng a tall, well-armored woman was fighting from the back of a stout grey warhorse, her blade flashing scythe-like as she cut her way through the brigands surrounding her. Minsk was already on foot and charging towards them, ARandomAudiobookAppeared dismounting to do the same, while Baldur remained with the horses, bow drawn back as he found his first target. Their reinforcements turned the battle quickly, those bandits not wise enough to flee early on, not later given the chance, the clash of metal finally ebbing to the groans of the wounded. The tall woman seemed the first to notice their presence, the warrior wheeling her horse about to clatter smartly over to them. She slipped from the saddle into their midst with a practiced grace, hauling off her helmet to reveal an open face, lightly tanned from days spent outside, her brown hair scraped back for travel into a tight braid which emphasized her high forehead, the large brown eyes stern over the wide, determined mouth. She nodded once, placing a hand over her chest in formal salute.
"My thanks, friends, your aid then was most welcome."
ARandomAudiobookAppeared dipped his head in a bow.
"We gave it gladly, my lady." "Father Casson, are there many wounded?"
she continued to the robed man who had just arrived at her side, his short grey hair the same color as the twitching mule he led, the blonde girl that followed him seeming more concerned about the mud that had been splattered up her skirts than the peril she had just faced.
"None seriously so. Some of the guards have suffered flesh wounds, perhaps a moment to tend them and we may be on our way once more. But who are these men who came so promptly to our aid?"
he asked with a smile, pulling his gaze from the carnage behind to the three men assembled before him.
You have our thanks, brothers. Always, we are happy to help those in trouble,
rumbled Minsk genially.
And might we know the names of our brave rescuers?
Asked the blonde girl coyly, her smile set very firmly on the swarthy man next to her. The ranger cleared his throat uncomfortably.
I am Valigar, this is Minsk and the knight is Anomen. Sir Anomen!
Snapped the brunette sharply,
of the most noble order of the Radiant Heart.
Anomen blinked, unused to being recognized, at least outside of trade meet.
Ah, yes, that is so, my lady. The Radiant Heart, truly!
Cried the old man delightedly.
Why, the gods must have blessed this meeting, Brianna. Ah, but how easily adversity drives away our manners. I am Father Casson, priest of Ilmater and the leader of this band. You are on a holy wandering, a pilgrimage, yes?
Asked Minsk. Casson inclined his head in a nod.
Of a sort, brother. A month ago, I received a vision of great suffering. The native peoples that populate the lands beyond the trackless sea cried out in my dreams, and I knew how my lord had charged me. Those people suffer, from disease and conflict brought by the greed of and it is our duty as Ilmateri to ease that distress where we may. You are all of you bound for Mazhdaka?
Questioned Valigar, a flicker of doubt creeping in as he surveyed their band. But Casson was genially shaking his head.
No, no. The guards will remain in Athkatla once we reach our ship, as will my daughter, Hannah. The wilds of the jungles are no place for her and she will stay with her aunt within the city until she is old enough to decide her own path.
The girl smiled at this, sending Valigar a shy look that gave Anomen the hint it may not lead to Mazhdaka.
And of course our good lady knight Brianna will be remaining in the city as well,
continued Casson.
I am not so honored yet, father,
the woman reminded, turning to them to add.
I am Brianna of Saint Riel the Righteous, sister of Torm. I was on my way to Athkatla and the very order Sir Anomen serves when I came upon these holy brothers just west of Eshperta. Ah, Lady Brianna, modest as ever,
sighed Casson.
We were under attack by the banditry that plagues the trade routes leaving the city. There were a few trolls and orcs in their number and many of our guards had been scattered and killed when she came upon us, the lady fighting valiantly and taking many wounds as she regrouped our flailing forces. She has travelled with us ever since, though the way has been more peaceable, well, until this afternoon.
Brianna made no comment as to his tale, dark eyes scanning the bodies that were strewn about the path.
Not all who attacked us lie here, some must have retreated back into the forests. I do not like to think of them escaping justice to lay another trap for some unwary travelers.
Casson was frowning, perhaps he did not like the delay the likely fruitless pursuit would mean.
Indeed, my dear, but we are but a day from Athkatla, we can inform the city guards once we arrive and a patrol can be sent out from there. But sirs,
he continued to their company, the warm smile once more creasing his eyes,
you travel to Athkatla as well? The journey will be easier if we walk it together.
It was agreed, indeed without a good excuse it would have been impossible to refuse, though Anomen imagined Valigar had wished they had, the rest of his afternoon spent under the attentions of the young Hannah. A few more hours' travel, their progress little slowed for this increase in their company, and it was as the dusk was falling that they came to a halt, just stepping from the road to make camp in amongst the trees of the forest's edge. Anomen shifted, pulling his cloak about him against the chill, the fire more a comfort for the soul than the body at this distance, Anomen on the edge of their gathering as he watched the camp before him. A group of guards were gambling over dice in one corner, the priests talking quietly before their tents or making their prayers as the group prepared to settle for the night, a no-man nodding as Valigar appeared from the woods at his back and sank down beside him.
Another day and we arrive in Athkatla,
a no-man sighed to the darkness above them.
It feels as though we have been away a lifetime.
Valigar snorted wryly.
It could be said you have. You were carried from the city the last time we left, Fritha marching us through the streets as though the demons of the abyss were at our heels. Do you miss her?
The ranger asked suddenly, eyes still trained forward, such a question not resting well with either of them. A no-man shrugged.
No more than I did when we still resided with the elves. We were parted long ago, it just took me some time to realize it. But you look forward to our return to the city.
He continued, stalwartly rejecting his melancholy.
I know you wish to ensure all is well at your estate. What task will take you then?
Valigar looked uncharacteristically uncomfortable.
I have yet to decide. I see.
Silence fell between them, a no-man's eyes drawn across the camp to where the Tormite, Brianna, was talking with Minsk, the woman clearly bemused by the hamster that was scurrying up his arm, though she smiled and nodded all the same.
She seems a worthy addition to your order,
offered the man next to him.
Yes, more worthy than some that have been accepted within its walls, though that is not my place to judge,
a no-man added hastily. Valigar quirked a rare smile.
Come now, a no-man. Your travels gave you the room to think for yourself, are you so ready to return your mind to the fold?
The knight frowned, ready to protest this, but he was interrupted by Minsk's arrival, the tall man throwing himself down at Valigar's side.
Such stern looks, Boo twitches in his anxiousness, what talk so holds us over here?
Valigar let his face fall into its customary frown.
We speak of the morrow, Minsk, and what trials it will bring. Dark thoughts from our dark ally, young Imoen said I was to recall her to you whenever you became too grim.
A no-man choked back a laugh, Minsk not so shy as he loudly rumbled his amusement, Valigar turning away, flushed and sulky.
You two gossip like old women. Now, good Valigar, there is a Rashmi saying unto the wisdom of old women, for they laugh when they may, perhaps it is something you should embark on, as well, yes? Come brothers.
Minsk laughed loudly,
you are soon to be home.
The Rashmi clearly attributed a lot more to such homecomings than they, but despite everything, a no-man found himself grinning along with him, it would be good to be home. They arrived in Athkatla just before high sun. A no-man left Valigar and Minsk at the city gates, dismounting his horse to lead the beast over to the temple district with Brianna and the missionaries. He did not remain in their company though, leaving them outside the temple of Ilmater, Brianna keen to give thanks for her safe arrival at the shrine to Torm, while a no-man himself had a reunion of another sort awaiting him at the order. A brief meeting with Prelate Wes Allen to inform the man of his arrival, and a no-man was in his room unpacking his few belongings, the hatching of canals far below his window sparkling in the spring sunlight. He would leave his estate empty at the moment, the old house holding too many memories for him, both good and bad, and he did not think it would do him any good being there alone. Outside, the main courtyard was its usual hive of activity, men crossing the square on their way to the smiths or heading for the gates, on errands for their knights or on their own business, and a no-man lingered at the edge of the stables feeling rather out of place. His own commander was out of the city and would not be returned for a few days, Prelate Wes Allen not wanting to guess at the task Sir Ryan would have him set to and so had given him the interim to settle back into his life there.
Ho, a no-man!
A no-man whipped back at the greeting, the golden-haired man no less than beaming as he strode across the courtyard to lock him in a hearty embrace.
Simon, it is good to see you. And you, friend. You gave us all quite the fright back then, dying on us like that, damn inconsiderate of you. How fortunate for all of us Fritha was one step ahead.
Anomen nodded, trying to ignore that twinge her name provoked.
I notice you play down your own part in that. I know I have said as such before, but... Think nothing of it,
Simon forestalled cheerfully, he clearly wasn't.
Were there any ramifications?
Anomen pressed, more than aware of what this sacrifice could have cost the man, but the squire just laughed.
Oh, I'll say. Moments after I've let Fritha run off with your body, I'm being frog-marched back to the order, the High Watcher before me and a whole battalion of acolytes and knights just returned from the cemetery trailing after us. Into the prelate's office, and once it had been established that I truly hadn't been bewitched by the evil ballspawn, I was given a stern dressing down by both Sir Ryan Troll and High Watcher Oisig, which lasted until Prelate Wes Allen was summoned from his chambers, my own knight, Sir Weiss, in tow. I really thought I was in for it then, but you know the prelate, he just calmly told everyone to wait outside and then he departed, too, just leaving me with my knight. And Sir Weiss was looking down at me, as stern as I've ever seen him, and just asked me one question. Well, squire, why did you do it? What did you tell him? The truth, of course. That in that moment, Fritha was staring up at me pleading that I trust her, my heart said yes and I followed it. Sir Weiss just nodded and told me to return to the dormitories. The next day I am called before the prelate, and it has been decided that I am to be put forward for my knighting ceremony this coming greengrass. Simon!
Cried Anomen, the word echoing gloriously across the courtyard,
that is wonderful. My sincere congratulations.
Simon was grinning, face glowing in his triumph.
Yes, only don't speak of it before Eric, I don't think he quite approves of the means by which it came about. He certainly goes very quiet whenever it is mentioned. But what of you?
The squire continued, his smile fading somewhat.
I suppose it is too much for even me to hope that Fritha returned to the city with you.
Anomen shook his head.
No, she has decided to remain with the elves for the time being.
Simon gave his back a sympathetic clap.
I am sorry for that. Eric explained you both had parted after we received your letter informing us you were returned to life. I had hoped once her soul was returned, you two would be able to reach a reconciliation. I need no explanation.
He cut in quickly as Anomen drew a breath.
Eric has already forbidden me of questioning you about it. I would just have you know that I trust your judgment in this, and whatever your path, I will walk it with you. And I'd best leave it at that.
A nod from Simon, and Anomen turned to see the man himself as Eric left the smiths to spot them.
Anomen,
he greeted, closing to the pair.
It is good to see you alive and well. I heard in the temple you had arrived. The missionaries are apparently full of talk of their journey over at the temple of Ilmater. Missionaries?
Repeated Simon. Anomen nodded.
We came upon a band of Ilmataran priests under attack by bandits a day or so from Trade Meet. We journeyed the remaining miles with them.
Simon laughed.
Ah, it is never dull.
He stopped suddenly and Anomen turned to follow his eye to where Sir Harn was stepping from the great hall, Squire Mark behind him and struggling under the weight of a large pack, while at his side she walked, tall and more slender now free of her armor, the dark brown braid shining chestnut in the sunlight.
Who is that?
Asked Simon.
A warrior priestess of Torm who arrived with the Ilmateri this morning,
answered Eric mildly.
I heard she is seeking entrance to the order. With the Ilmateri?
Repeated the squire, eyes suddenly fixed upon Anomen.
Then you? Ah, Sir Anomen,
came the call, warm and free from any affectation, Brianna speaking a word to Harn before the pair of them had changed course, Mark huffing after them.
I can take that, squire,
the woman offered, noticing Mark's struggles to take her pack from the boy, heaving it onto her shoulder with a smile as Harn stepped forward to make the introductions.
Ah, of course, you will have already met Sir Anomen. Then, allow me to introduce Squire Simon and Sir Eric. Sirs, this is Lady Brianna.
A mutter of polite greetings, Eric continuing,
So, you hope to join the order, my lady?
The woman nodded soberly.
That is so, I have spoken to the prelate and will face judgment at the ceremony this green grass.
Anomen smiled.
Then you will be in good company, Simon,
he faltered at the squire's suddenly quelling glare.
Well, many squires will be seeking entrance with you.
Anomen finished hastily. An awkward silence followed, that all but Harn seemed to notice. Brianna cast a glance behind her to where Lady Irlina was watching them patiently from the doors of the dormitories.
I believe I must go, it was nice meeting you all. A pleasant-spirited lady, is she not?
Said Harn as they watched the two women disappear inside.
The order could use more with her virtues. Indeed,
agreed Simon earnestly. Anomen doubted they could ever fill the order with enough of his sisters in arms.
She comes with many commendations from priests and soldiers alike,
Harn continued proudly,
yet she is without the pride that such would foster in many. She spoke very highly of you and your companions to the prelate when talk turned to the ambush. She is too modest of her own part in that,
Anomen demurred. The old knight laughed.
I do not doubt it. Well, a good day to you.
The three men saluted as Harn strolled off across the sunlit courtyard, humming blithely.
So, what plans have we now?
Asked Simon.
Sir Weiss has given me leave today. Well, I have archery instruction out on training fields,
offered Eric.
Marcine and Tristan are attending as well, but you can both come if you wish. The younger squires need all the instructors that can be spared.
Simon grinned, an afternoon out of the city in the sunshine clearly appealing to him.
That sounds a worthy pursuit. I'll fetch my bow and meet you at the gates. What of you, Anomen?
Anomen smiled, the ease with which he could seemingly step back into his old life was comforting. He nodded once.
Yes, I will attend.
Valigar stepped from the cobbled street, the strident clatter of hooves softened to a dull rasp as he led the two horses through the gates to the Korthala estate and up the winding gravel path, the guards nodding respectfully as he passed. Valigar and Minsk had parted just after Anomen had left. Valigar had invited the man to stay at his estate while he was in the city, an offer the Rashami had accepted though he did not return with him then. It was barely noon and Minsk was eager to begin asking around Athkatla's many markets and secure passage north. The stables were empty, the Korthala estate had kept no horses since his grandfather's days there, though the buildings were kept in good order. Valigar tethered the beasts beside a brimming water trough, calling Mullen from where he had been tending the vegetable patch just behind the block and sending him straight into the city for feed and bedding. Mab was in the kitchen, busy preparing lunch for the small company of servants, the girl pink and beaming as she welcomed his return, hurriedly fetching a carafe of ale from the pantry to serve him a cup and bidding him to have a seat. He could not accept her hospitality though, leaving her with instructions to send Martin up with some hot water and summon old Master Nentat to meet him in the library, before he retired to his room to wash away the dust of the road. The library was just as he had left it, unchanged even from when he had been a boy, a tall room of towering bookcases, filled with volumes on subjects as varied and ranging as their worn covers. Amnian law, animal husbandry, heraldry, references and plays and papers on every subject but the magic that had so consumed his parents in the end, they had each had their own private collections for such volumes, and they had kept them close. Master Nintat, the estate's seneschal, was waiting there as he had requested. The man sat in one of the large armchairs, looking pale and older than his vitality usually suggested in the light of the two tall windows. He rose promptly to greet him, though no sign in his physique of the years he bore, and the two men talked of the estate, Valigar's plans to become a more permanent resident there and perhaps have more of a hand in running his birthright, being met with warm encouragement. The man was gone now, returning to the accounts which had apparently kept him absorbed all morning, and leaving Valigar in that room, alone with the books he doubted he would ever find the time to read. Mullen and Ivory talking in the gardens below him as they unloaded a small handcart, everyone in that house occupied but he. Was this it? Was this to be his life now, days just idled away in that empty house? He had made the decision to return there, to try and take up the responsibilities he had been avoiding since his parents' deaths, but where did he begin? Most other nobles were content to let their seneschals keep reign of their sprawling estates, diverting themselves with their own interests, the usual round of balls and hunts and pointless decadence. Or they would instead turn their eyes and hands to the city itself, building their power through trade and politics. Valigar did not deny that for those like Nalia, great things could be done in those intimate meetings between nobles that took place so far from the hushed bustle of the council buildings. But these subtle pursuits were not for him. So, what was then? Tyrrell was still a free man, a murderer and necromancer both. Perhaps Valigar could resume his investigations. But such felt like a disheartening returning to his old ways, and in that moment his heart longed for those days he had been out with Suna and others, that feeling he was working for the good of all while living life free from any expectations but his own. It was a few hours later when Minsk returned from the promenade. He had had no luck as yet, though he remained hopeful that he would find a suitable caravan in time, and they ate dinner together in the warm kitchens. The back door opened to the cool twilit gardens. Valigar could not bear the idea of being waited upon in the huge dining hall, though he could tell his presence there was a source of discomfort for some, Mab disappearing as soon as their meal was served, no doubt going off to join the rest of the servants wherever they had gathered to take their own supper. Valigar leaned back in the hard wooden chair, pushing his empty plate away from him, cleared by appreciation of the efforts gone to make it rather than any desire for the food. The moments were creeping slowly by, marked the fitful spiting of the heart, an irregular clock to measure the long evening ahead. Minsk was opposite him and just as reflective. It was still too early to retire and they both knew it. Valigar sighed and pushed his chair back. He was not usually a proponent of such things, but...
A drink, Minsk?
Well, both were drunk and a fight was soon to follow, Vagrun and Halgard falling out the tavern to scuffle in the muddy street, each too drunk to land a blow. And then this great shout,
Vagrun!
Splits the calls of those gathered, quickly followed by a piercing shriek of Halgard.
And these two men, the greatest warriors of our Fang, who only moments before so full of fight, are now on their feet and quailing under the tongues of their angry wives, who scolded the torn clothes and mudded furs, and dragged each home like a wayward child.
Valigar joined Minsk in his deep bellowing laugh. The copper coronet was livelier that he remembered it, the tavern packed with smiling patrons, the air a cacophony of laughter and shouts for service, more maids than he had recalled working there before, hurrying between the tables. He and Minsk were standing back from chaos though, at the bar as they took their ale. Valigar had never been given chance to appreciate it before, but Minsk was quite good company. Even their training session together at the Elven City had left few opportunities for talk, but it seemed the man had a wealth of tales, from his homeland and his travels both.
Ah, the women of Rashomon have an inborn fire, like a belly full of Uyield,
Minsk laughed, Hendak smiling as he stepped from the back to find them at the bar.
Ah, Minsk and Valigar,
the old gladiator greeted.
Bernard said you were about. The next round is on me, my friends, for there is much for men such as we to celebrate at the moment."
Valigar smiled, nodding his thanks as the man refilled his cup.
"You seem in good spirits, Hendak." "Indeed, it is so. There have been many more arrests of slavers and their foul ilk in the slums and all over the city of late. I see his trial produced many names, those men who would deal in it, the nobles who would find entertainment in it, and those guards who would turn palm up and eyes away to allow it to continue. The magistrates are eager to show that, in the city of coin, there are some things which cannot be bought."
"Ah,
good news indeed!"
cried Minsk earnestly.
"All those who would profit in such misery should be brought to justice."
Hendak nodded, his manner graver as he leaned in.
"But for all that, be wary, my friends. Many here view you as heroes for your part in first exposing Latinan's crimes, but there will be others, especially in the slums, who are looking to make an example of men such as we."
Minsk slammed down his mug with a defiant ha! To send froth sloshing over the counter.
"Who knows, we do not fear them. Such slavers deserve all they reap, and we have seen the end of many more since then. The red-skinned Ehid walks no more among the living, this I know."
"Ehid Brask is dead," confirmed Hendak. Minsk nodded proudly.
"Yes, killed on Brunlaw when the gods blessed us with a second meeting." "Well, that is some news,"
the gladiator laughed.
"But mind to whom you speak it, that is all I ask. Ah, a moment, friends."
And Hendak was suddenly gone, moving to help the maid who had just arrived back with her order. Valigar watched him go, turning to Minsk to offer further caution against spreading tales of their exploits too loudly, though he was not given the chance.
"Joaquin's purse, you're a tall one,"
laughed an amiable voice behind him, Valigar turning to find a short, well-rounded man staring up at Minsk, the tray of drinks he bore suddenly forgotten.
"You two mercs, I don't suppose you want to serve as caravan guards, do you? I've one leaving in a few days and the pay is good." "Valigar is no mercenary,"
explained Minsk,
"but I seek such work. To where are you heading?"
The merchant looked surprised he even cared enough to ask.
"Why, south to Brost and then depending on the trade, perhaps east across to Riathaven, could keep you in work for a good month or so, there, and back."
But Minsk was shaking his head.
"I am sorry, but it is north we seek to travel." "Ah, a shame, truly,"
the man sighed,
"for we could have used the extra muscle. There are rumors of fighting in Tethur, though the reports change every day. Probably those Dem revolutionaries stirring up trouble again. Still, better to outlay a little more on guards, than lose your entire caravan, as my father would say. Well, a good evening to you both."
And he bustled back to his table, the silence he left them in holding a suddenly somber air that Valigar broke with the inevitable question.
"What will happen when you do return to Rashomon, Minsk? You said you will be judged, but what will that mean for you?"
Minsk finished a long draught of ale with a shrug.
"I do not know, and Bu does not think it wise to dwell upon it. The council of the Witch Laren will find me guilty of failing my witch, for indeed it is so. Elder Yundrum may speak words to assure it was not a matter of my cowardice though, and that I have taken the life of Dinah Ye's murderer will be acknowledged, as well, when it comes to my sentence." "And then what?"
Another despondent shrug.
"I may be sent to patrol the Icelands with the others who commit crimes not serious enough to warrant death, or perhaps some other punishment, and then when my time is served, I do not know. I have no family. I was born and raised in a small village, Mutern, in the wooded valleys just north of Lake Tyryalag. My mother died in birth, my father caring for me on his own, but soon he came to see I was not as the other boys, their minds as quick as the bright little fish we would spend our summers catching. He disowned me and I would have been without any rank or hope of life, if it had not been for Master Janiev, the ranger of our valley.
Minsk smiled, clearly finding in him the father he had been denied.
He took me in, teaching me the ways of the land and creatures. Their slow habits suddenly laid clear before my eyes, and it was in that time I came upon Boo, and such an alliance was born. None could hunt as we, me and my master and Boo, even deep winter finding us returned from the forests with spoils, and my worth to the village was, at last, shown to all.
The smile lingered a moment, warm with memories, and then faded.
Master Janiev died when I reached my 20th winter. The elders of Mudern asked me to take on his mantle, but I knew there were just as many in the village who believed me unworthy. A war of words was brewing, and I left to spare the village. I followed the call for warriors north to Molten, joining a fang under the old chieftain Hulgrag, and it was there I met Dinah Hare. She was serving in the city with her witch Laren sisters, in command of the warrior bands that served that province. Ah, good were those days, our band traveling the wilds on horse and foot, earning honors in battle and serving our land, and when it came for her to leave on her dejama, of all the brave warriors of our fang, it was I she chose.
His voice swelled with the pride of it, his face glowing, before his expression fell to dejection once more.
But I failed her, and now when I return, all those who before tried to dissuade her from me will know they were right. No fang will take me now, this I know, for to fail your witch is to fail all of Rashomon. But perhaps I will be able to return to my village, or find work on a farm or boat in Molten. Boo tells me I must try, and it will be good to return to my homeland.
Valigar frowned, angered by his willingness to submit to this injustice, a warrior of his skill reduced to laborer by circumstances beyond his control.
And is that what Dinah Hare would have wanted for you? Is that what you think she envisaged when she vouched for you to attend her on her dejama?
Minsk shook his head, stubbornly dropping his attention to his pocket, scooping the yawning hamster into his hand.
It matters not. I must return. I failed and I must face their judgment.
And they returned to their drinks in silence. The promenade was its usual bustle of merchants and those there browsing the many stalls looking for those final bargains of the day as the owners tried to clear those wares that would not keep the night. Minsk stood on the western steps watching the colored canopies flap listlessly in the warm breeze, bright in the sunlight that poured through the archway at his back. Boo sat on the plinth of the great stone lion next to him enjoying a quick wash. It had taken a while when he had first left his homeland to grow accustomed to the size of those foreign cities, the maze of buildings that stretched seeming without end, the great settlements of his home suddenly small by comparison. He had been frustrated, at first, the places and food so different from the home he had left, the people seemingly mocking him in their language that sounded like the sing-song prattle of children at play. But the honor of serving Dinah Hare on her dejama had kept him resolute, and the babble of their tongues had finally, with his witch's help, become the intelligible conde. Then he spoke now. How would those Rashomon cities seem now, upon his return? Would his people welcome him back, or would he be the foreigner after so long away? Minsk grunted to himself, scooping Boo back into the pocket of his jerkin. It mattered not, he was to return to face judgment, and that was what he would do. It had been a few days since they had arrived back in Athkatla, the end of Ches, a mix of hot days and muggy nights that made him long for the cool fresh winds of his home. The press of bodies about him was almost unbearable as he stepped down into the market to make one final round before he returned to Valigar's house for another night, though a shrill noise to his right caught his attention before he could get very far, cutting through the hawking merchants, and in his pocket he felt Boo stir.
Father, father, no.
It was an angry voice, not loud, but discordant its frustration, Minsk's great head swiveling to the source to find the argument that was in full swing before the stall a few paces away. a slight young woman trying in vain to halt the stout man next her, both hands clasped about his thick arm as they argued. In figure, they were different enough, though they both possessed the same fair hair and long noses that marked them as relations, the merchant's jowls trembling unpleasantly as he finally shook her off.
"No, I will hear no more, Katrin,"
he snapped, holding up a hand to preclude any reply, his manner far more personable as he closed the last few steps to Minsk's side.
"Good sir, please, I would have words with you. I am Rygo near, I deal in ceramics and I have heard from the merchants about here you are looking to serve on a caravan heading north, yes? I have one traveling to the gate tomorrow, but one of my guards has pulled out, I wonder if you would be interested in taking his place." "You would leave on the morrow,"
confirmed Minsk, his mind considering the fact and finding it more than acceptable.
"Yes, this would please me greatly."
Rygo looked beyond relieved, his ruddy face split with a smile.
"Ah, that is excellent news. The caravan master was threatening to leave without my own wagons, were they not adequately protected. The pay will be 50 gold pieces, though all your food and lodging will be covered by the caravan. You can collect your wage from the Seven Sons trading coster once you arrive in the gate. You'll be serving with 2 others, Brun and Ossio, both old hands, so they'll see you straight. I believe they and the other guards are often found drinking in the back room of the Crossed Keys of an afternoon. Why don't you go and meet them, get a feel for the company you will be keeping before you leave,
Minsk nodded once.
"Yes, Boo approves of this course."
A flicker of doubt crossed the man's face, his daughter seized her chance.
"But father..." "Hush, girl. Well, until tomorrow then."
Rygo smiled, resolute it seemed, the man thrusting a soft hand towards him, and a handshake sealed the thing. Minsk turned, heading back to the western steppes, a new hope rising in him. Tomorrow he would be leaving, each step taking him closer to his homeland, and his judgment. His own step faltered just under the western archway, Boo peeking his head from his pocket to give an inquiring squeak, and he let the creature clamber onto his hand, his velvety fur a comfort as he tried to ignore the small squirming doubt that writhed, black and oily in his stomach. He knew what his return would mean, had always known ever since he had been forced to watch from between the bars of his cage as good Dinah Hare was murdered before him. But it seemed his words to Valigar the other night had awoken something in him, some strange spark of dissent. Minsk knew he was not the wisest of men, his mind taking time to work through matters others seemed to come to as instinct, but the long hot nights had given him more than enough time for thinking as he had lain awake talking over matters with Boo. The law demanded he return and pay for his failure, and his heart did long to see his homeland once again. But would the judgment the which Laren reached truly restore his stolen honor? Boo was unsure, and with that Minsk's doubt could only grow. He stared down at the hamster he held, the tiny ink-blot eyes gazing gravely back at him. Valigar had been right, both he and Boo knew this, they did great things there in the Sword Coast and now he was to return to his village in an air of failure that would forever mar the rest of his life. Was that right? Minsk shook himself, placing Boo gently back in his pocket and continuing his pace, unused to such thoughts. The laws of the Witch Laren demanded restitution and he would return to make it. The Crossed Keys was a small, dingy tavern a few streets west on that hazy border where the trade quarter merged gradually into the slums. And it was no nicer inside the place, the few tables covered in empty cups though they could barely be seen through the fog of pipe smoke. Minsk felt Boo fidget in his pocket.
"I know, Boo, we will not stay long. Barkeep," he continued more loudly to the tall, gangly man who was stood behind the counter, "I look for your back room. Do you now?"
The man leered, eyeing him up and down with a wry smile before nodding to the door to their left.
"It ain't locked." My thanks.
The room beyond was small, though thankfully much clearer without the reek of the pipuweed, the 2 windows boarded up against the day and the only light came from the wide ring of candles hung above them. A single long table was set beneath it, the 5 men, 2 thick-set and 1 robed, who had been seated about it drinking, slowly making to their feet.
Well, well,
drawled the man at their center, his dark eyes as black as his hair in the gloom.
Who's this then? I am Minsk. Ryko has hired me as a guard on your caravan.
A ripple of low laughter. The man smiled, the scar on his cheek twisting.
Is that so?
Minsk nodded, a hand clamped over his pocket as Boo writhed madly within. Something was very wrong.
Minsk, Minsk,
came one of the other men, tapping his weak chin thoughtfully.
I believe I've heard that name before. Yeah, weren't you one of those who broke up the slavers' ring here in the slums?
Minsk nodded proudly.
Yes, that is I. What, that group who freed the slaves and killed Lady Nan?
asked one of the others.
Oh, yes, a glorious battle that was. And who murdered Ahid Braskonbrinlaw?
came the dark-haired man slowly.
Yes, that was.
Minsk stopped. The men about him shared a smile, though only the one at their center spoke.
Ahid was a fine chief to those under him, and there's a lot of people who will pay good money to see you in chains. Get him.
The men scattered at his shout, Minsk bellowing his rage as he grappled with the 2 men who had suddenly grabbed his arms.
Quickly, now!
The weak-shinned man opposite had whipped out a long slender wand, leveling the pale switch at him from the other side of the table, eyes screwed up as he summoned the magics. A fizzle of yellow sparks and nothing more, the surrounding men glancing wildly between them as its wielder spat panicked accusations at their resident mage.
You said it would paralyze him.
The dark-skinned mage chuckled genially.
Oh, my apologies gentlemen, but I fear someone else gave me a better offer, best of luck.
And the crack of his teleportation spell was barely audible over Minsk's roar, a raw power surging through him as a wild fury exploded within. He would never be caged again.
Hold him still. Perhaps.
The instructions were lost as one of the men still trying to wrestle him down was thrown into the table, a single punch felling the other, the man dead at his feet as Minsk at last drew his sword. The stocky man was already staggering upright, narrow-eyed as he hefted the blade in his hand, the remaining 2 men taking a similar stance on the other side of the table. Minsk did not give them chance to bring their numbers to bear upon him, driving his sword spear-like at the stocky man's stomach, the low-hanging chandelier and close walls giving him little hope of any of his more powerful swings. The stocky man parried the thrust, but falteringly so, Minsk given no time to press the advantage as their dark-haired leader appeared behind, the ranger kicking a chair into his path. The leader stumbled forward and it would have been an easy kill, had it not been for his burly ally, the man lunging a stab at Minsk's chest, his great sword heaved up to block the blow and Minsk did not see the dagger that flashed in his offhand until it was too late. A white-hot tooth between his ribs, Minsk's rage and anguish won as he smashed his fists and the sword pommel clenched within into the man's jaw, the table preventing his opponent's retreat as Minsk's blade pressed forward, biting into his thick neck. A spray of blood, and he collapsed with a low gurgle. The remaining pair had regrouped by now, circling him warily as he staggered back a few paces into the room. A wounded man was twice the danger of a whole one, at least in the beginning, the dark leader watching him, tensed and ready, his weak shin second trembling as he adjusted and readjusted the grip on his dagger. The leader moved first, feinting a blow to his shoulder that Minsk exposed a flank to block, the dark man yelling his order.
Lejun, finish him, you coward!
Minsk twisted, feeling yet more sinew in his side tier as he made a desperate swing behind him. Lejun was poised, the dagger only inches from his back, and Minsk saw in it his end. His anger at this injustice voiced in a great bellow, and the man's nerve finally failed him. A choked whimper, and he was running for the door, the man he left screaming a curse after him as he made one last stab at victory. Minsk whirled just in time to catch the thrust, parrying it with a swing that cut a swathe through his hip, and the man lurched sideways, coughing black blood across the surface as he clung vainly to the table, before his strength failed him. Minsk stared down at the body through pain-dimmed eyes, the world swimming about him. He was breathing heavily, the deep lungfuls never quite sating his dizzying lust for air, and he felt as though he was drowning, the man only just managing to stop his arms trembling long enough to sheath his gory blade. His side was on fire, hot blood seeping through the fingers of the hand he had clamped over it. Lejun had left the door wide open, and Minsk staggered after him. The bar was deserted, the ranger stumbling through the muddle of empty chairs and out into the street where passers-by stopped to point and gawk, but lent no aid. He made it to the end of the building before his knees buckled, the man collapsed and panting in the gutter, the glowing amber sky above him suddenly shaded by a dark silhouette. It was the merchant's shrill daughter, her young face glazed with tears as she choked through her sobs.
"Oh, gods, there's blood everywhere. Oh, this is all my fault, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. My father did not want to do this, but he was so frightened of them harming me. I'm so sorry, I'll get help, I swear it."
Minsk tried to halt her, but the words would not come, a groan dying on his lips as the girl stumbled back from him, her feet clattering on the cobbles as she fled off down the street, footsteps fading along with the world as Minsk finally lost consciousness. The stylus scratched over the parchment, smooth and without the halting and hesitance that would lead to blots on the fine black trail it left. It had been a while since Valigar had written for any length of time, and it had taken some practice to get back the drills of his youth, as proved by the mess of smudges and blots that had been his first draft. He withdrew the stylus, letting it hover at a safe distance from the letter as he stretched out his back. He was in what had been his father's study, the small room well lit by the large window behind him. Even as the dusk drew in, the solid mahogany desk and large chair set before it practically the only pieces of furniture in there, for the man would have any books he desired brought up from the library a floor beneath, and the room felt uncluttered and airy even for its smaller size. A glance to his first letter and Valigar stooped once more to resume his transcribing. It had been a few days now since his return, and life there in Athkatla was rolling quietly along. He had not seen much of Minsk over those last few days, the man spending most of his time out in the city looking for some means north, and he himself had been busy, too. Nentat had more than encouraged his newfound interest in the estate, and he had been learning from the old seneschal about the lands his family held, how they were used now and what improvements could perhaps be made. Valigar still determined to build a legacy for his family to replace the heir he could not bring himself to give them. But that had not kept him at the house entirely, and he had been about the city a few times on his own errands. He had seen a nomen once, a chance meeting on the main bridge that linked the government district to the merchants' quarter, bringing the two of them together for a short exchange. The younger man seemed much happier in himself, talking of the order and his trials training the new squires, the young paladin, Eric, gravely silent at his side, though that was perhaps to be expected. The only occasion they had met before, Valigar had been a willing accomplice in the theft of his friend's body. He had dropped in at Fritha's theatre too, just to let them know their patron was alive and well enough. They had just decided on a new production, a musical play which Higold seemed to think Fritha would have approved of, though some of his cast looked little enthused. According to Mek, not all of them could sing. Valigar leaned back in his chair with a sigh. The world was changing about him, and he had to change as well. He signed his name with barely a flourish, dusting the paper with powdered cuttlebone and folding the parchment up to write the direction on the back. The candle before him provided the heat, the sealing wax padding to congeal like blood over the open edge, and he let it cool a moment before pressing the fat signet ring that encircled his thumb into the still malleable wax, a polite knock sounding on the door before him as he pulled it cleanly away.
Enter.
It was Ivory, the man bobbing the quick nod of acknowledgement that Valigar preferred over the unnecessary shows of subservience others of his circle insisted upon.
My lord, there is a gentleman downstairs awaiting you, he says he is known to you. We showed him into the drawing room.
Valigar nodded, the chair moving noiselessly back over the thick rug as he made to rise and pass the man the square of parchment.
Good. Please take this over to the couriers.
Another brisk nod and Ivory was gone, clearly hoping to catch the place before they closed for the evening, and Valigar made his own way down the stairs to show himself into the drawing room. And there in the doorway he stopped, frozen as he stared at the man just seated mildly in an armchair before the windows, as though those 15 years had never passed.
Allergard.
A gnomon drew a deep breath of cool air, a memory of the day's warmth still lingering in the breeze as the dusk fell, the man following Simon and Eric through the promenade where the merchants were packing away their stalls for another day. He had been out of the city that day with Eric and 2 other knights on the training grounds the order held just beyond the walls, supervising the younger squires as they were drilled in sword and mace and unarmed combat. They had ended the day with a small tournament that was born more as games than anything serious, one of his healing skills always essential for such events, though there were few injuries this time outside of the expected scrapes and bruises. It had been a fine day, the field warm under the high sun and rich with the scent of the drying grass, the air ringing with the clash of blunted swords and the shouts of triumph and laughter, and it reminded him of his own training at the seminary. Well, perhaps not the laughter. Training was a serious matter there, and such antics had been frowned upon. At one time, he would have agreed with them, but he could see now the many small joys that could be taken in life, and he wondered not for the first time, how different his path would have been, who he would have become, had his father not first stood in his way all those years ago. The Golden Scales was quiet, the hour not yet late enough to see the tavern filled with the local merchants, enjoying a drink and talk of business with the rivals who became friends as soon as the markets closed. The 3 took their usual table before the windows, just back from the bustle of doors, their presence there common enough in days past to get them a nod from the barman, and a gnomon knew 3 tall mugs of the local ale would be arriving soon afterwards.
So, how went the training today?
Asked Simon with his usual cheer. Eric nodded his thanks to the maid who had just arrived with their drinks.
Well, the boys are coming along. I saw a most notable change in young Redden. Now he has overcome his homesickness. Ah, poor lad. I always felt lucky in that, for my family were always but an half-hour's walk away. Were you ever homesick, Eric? It seems so long ago now. We were that young, I can barely recall it.
The paladin shrugged, swallowing the ale he had just drawn to offer.
Not particularly. The roads up to Waterdeep are fast and well-traveled, and I kept in close contact. Oh, I remember now,
the squire cried.
I had half the boys in my dormitory convinced you were already betrothed, 16 or not, the amount of letters you used to receive.
A gnomon laughed along with Simon, Eric sending them an indulgent smile over the rim of his cup. Neither of them needed to ask if a gnomon himself had been homesick on leaving for the seminary at 13, they all knew he could not wait to get away from the place.
So how did Sir Wise have you whiling away your day?
Asked Eric. Simon grinned.
Not so pleasantly as you, I fancy. I spent much of my time attending him at the council buildings as he held a meeting with General Herodus and Minister Agave, there could be trouble in the south and the council may want our involvement. The siege in Murin?
Asked a Nomen.
No, much further south, outside of There are rumors of some giant band ranging about Tethur, though reports are sketchy at best and we have yet to hear of any true conflicts. The Council of the Six sent an offer of aid to Queen Zeranda, as their forces are much reduced since the trouble there. But with the recent territory disputes and boundary shifts, the Council doubt they will invite Amnian troops in any number across the border. And so the Order has been asked to make a similar offer of aid to our brothers at the Order of the Silver Chalice, though it is all still just rumors, it may turn out there is no trouble to quell.
A Nomen nodded soberly.
Well, let us hope.
He paused, his eyes caught by the tall figure passing their table, the young woman hardly noticing them, intently scanning the tavern about her as she was, the skirts of her long green gown sweeping over the floorboards, and a Nomen had to look hard to be sure, she looked much different with her hair loose.
Lady Brianna.
The woman started, glancing down to finally note them.
Oh, Sir Nomen, a good evening to you, sirs. Please do not rise. Will you not then join us, my lady?
Offered Simon, relaxing back into his chair, and the woman shook her head.
Thank you, no, I am actually supposed to be meeting Lady Irlina and a few of the other young women of the Order, though I fear I may have misheard the meeting place.
She gave a brisk laugh, her mistake seemingly more diversion than distress.
This city is so much larger than to where I am accustomed. Where are you from, my lady?
Asked Eric.
The temple dedicated to Saint Riel just east of Valim's court, where the fort guards the pass through the Troll Mountains. I took my holy orders there while still a girl and trained with the local militia.
She sent another contemplative frown across the tavern about her.
Perhaps I shall try over at the Golden Goose. Have a pleasant evening, sirs.
A swish of green and she was turned and disappearing through the door, Simon watching that swinging curtain of rich brown hair until the wood closed upon it.
It is pleasing to see the ladies settling here. Irlina has a gift for putting people at ease. You know, she asked after Fritha the other day.
He continued, drawing an absent mouthful of his drink and deftly avoiding Eric's instant frown.
And we got to talking about the last time she had seen her, at the Feast of the Moon. I was so disappointed to discover I had missed hearing Fritha play.
A Nomen smiled faintly, happy in recalling it even after all that had happened since.
She was not so eager to volunteer her talents at the time. I doubted any would have heard her had it not been for Squire Mark's obvious reluctance.
Simon was beaming.
How very like her. You know, I never told you this, but if you hadn't been so keen on her, I would have definitely pursued her myself. Simon!
Hissed Eric. The squire ignored him.
Well, it is done now. Lady Brianna is lovely, is she not? Not that she is my particular preference. No, I always favored more lively girls.
He began to laugh.
Do you recall the time Fritha? Simon!
The paladin snapped more loudly, Simon finally losing patience with the man.
Eric, will you stop saying my name? We cannot just pretend she does not exist. It is fine, Eric,
a Nomen forestalled as the paladin drew an indignant breath.
Simon is right, we cannot just forget her, and I would not even if I could.
So, Simon continued, downing the last of his ale with a discontented sigh,
are we having another in here or?
The door burst open, Brianna suddenly in the mouth and looking grave. A Nomen was on his feet in an instant.
My lady! Sir Nomen, she gasped, you are still here, thanks be. I have just seen your companion, Minsk. He was being carried along the street by some ilmatary, he looks to have been gravely wounded.
The man was smiling, lined face creasing at his mouth and eyes.
It has been a long time, has it not, Valigar?
Valigar nodded, his voice coming out in a croak in his surprise.
That it has.
The old man's smile broadened, the neat and now grey beard standing out on his darkly tanned skin, a strange inverse of the pale, dark-haired man who had once been his tutor. The keen black eyes were still the same though, the depths now regarding him with a fond appraisal as Valigar finally crossed the threshold and ARandomAudiobookAppeared politely rose to greet him.
And what a man you have become! You were but a boy when I left here, a sulky 14-year-old who would rather play hunter in the gardens, than sit at his lessons. Why so wary, boy? Are you too grown now to give welcome to your old teacher? Forgive me, ARandomAudiobookAppeared, you are welcome,
Valigar finally managed, gesturing politely to the chair the man had just left as he took the one opposite, his weakened legs more than glad to be relieved of their burden.
It has been a while.
His old tutor nodded.
17 years and I feel them too, the winds of Mulhorand are hot and unforgiving. Is that where you have been? When my mother, well. You can say it, boy,
ARandomAudiobookAppeared chuckled.
It was clear to both of us that if you were to continue your studies into the weave you would need a firmer hand than I had the patience for. I wanted an apprentice thirsty to learn, not a boy who had to be dragged to every lesson. My leaving was best for us both, though I do wonder if your good parents managed to find a tutor to replace me.
Valigar frowned, unwilling to recall his youth and his early lessons in the art he now so reviled.
They did not for any length of time anyway, and I feel it is a little late to begin again now, if that is why you have returned.
ARandomAudiobookAppeared rewarded his tight quip with another fond chuckle.
Oh no, if I could not turn you to it then, I would hardly try now, would I?
He paused, his eyes sterner as he added,
You have quite the reputation in my circles, young Valigar, though I would hope that those mages who are innocent of any crime have nothing to fear. That is so, but you surely did not return here to ask me that.
His old tutor smiled, reclining back in his chair in a manner Valigar recalled of him, where the lesson was about to be put on hold for some far more engaging story or anecdote, and Valigar could feel the boy inside him edging forward in his seat, eager to hear it.
I have been traveling since I left here, letting my studies taking me where they willed. I was in Mulhorand these past 3 years when a spot of business drew me back to the Sword Coast. I had recently lost my patron and such research is never inexpensive. Ask any mage what his main spell component is and the truthful will answer gold. It was only when I met with old Master Levido up in Alakhan, beautiful city, and the people are just as comely, it was a shame my visit was to be marred by such grim news. He told me your parents had passed on.
ARandomAudiobookAppeared smiled, his face more somber than it has been yet.
I cannot say that it was that which has brought me to Athkatla, but since I was in the city, I thought to come and pay my respects.
Valigar nodded deeply.
I thank you, then, for taking the time. It was the least I could do. They were good friends of mine. I kept in contact with your mother for years after I departed, though we eventually lost touch. Well.
He sighed, making to stand once more, Valigar hurrying to his feet as well.
I suppose my obligations have been discharged and I have yet to find an inn for the night. You are staying in the city? Yes, well until my ship leaves 4 days hence.
Valigar swallowed, a part of him still undecided even as the offer left his lips.
I will have Mab prepare one of the guest rooms, if you wish.
ARandomAudiobookAppeared watched him a moment, when his face broke into a beaming smile.
Well now, I should like that very much. Oh, don't trouble yourself.
He forestalled as Valigar reached for the bell pull.
I know young Mab well enough to ask her myself.
And Valigar watched as he strode from the room, humming cheerfully, the silence he left him in echoing with memories. End of chapter.